Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me, as always, is Armin Navabi. Armin Navabi, how are you today? How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. I'm not going to talk about the weather right now, even though I think that we should at some point. However, we do have a lot to get to today in this episode, and I'm really excited about this episode. So, a little bit of background. About a month ago, in July, I did an Ex-Muslims of North America event in New York City with Muhammad Syed and Ibn Warraq. Ibn Warraq is like one of the first books I read, one of the first ex-Muslims I was exposed to. He had a book called Why I'm Not a Muslim, based on, derived from the Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. And the topic was about enlightenment in the Muslim world. And one of the things that he talked about was Quranic criticism in the tradition of biblical criticism. So a key element of the European Enlightenment was the emergence of biblical criticism. That's one of the things that really, really made the Bible transparent, Scripture transparent, and brought skepticism into the fold. So, this became an academic discipline. And this arose out of the German Enlightenment around the 1700s. And the whole idea was to apply a non-sectarian, a reason-based approach to studying Scripture, not just a theological, religious approach. And the point was to avoid dogma and to avoid bias. So biblical criticism, this academic tradition, was instrumental in neutering pre-Enlightenment Christianity, and to challenge and normalize the notion of biblical inerrancy, the idea that the Bible is infallible, and to help shatter a lot of taboos like blasphemy and apostasy. So in Islam, though, the Quran is still seen by the vast majority of Muslims as the inerrant, infallible, literal word of Allah, the creator of the universe. And criticizing it, even questioning it, it has really, really terrible penalties, as many of us know, across the Muslim world. But now, our guest today is somebody who I've been following for a while, and he, I think, is one of the most, for me, one of the most interesting and fascinating Quranic skeptics. He's very, very educated on it, and he has really, dug into the history of it and dug into the Quran. So it's really great to.
I would say one of the two most intelligent ex-Muslims on this topic.
Yeah, they're both called Abdullah, which means slave of Allah, by the way. But I'm really glad that if we have people who are named slave of Allah turning around and finding enlightenment, I'm more optimistic than ever. So Abdullah Gondal, is that how I pronounce it? Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Well, welcome to the show, and thank you. It's an honor to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and so can you, let's just start really quick, just to let you guys know that we're going to do 2 episodes, because we wanted to talk about the Quran and we also wanted to talk about the biography of Muhammad. So the first thing today, we're going to focus mainly on the Quran, and we are going to have Abdullah back later for part 2 of this, where we are going to really, really dig into the biography and history of Muhammad, and how it was documented, how it was not documented. So Abdullah, so can you start by telling us a little bit about your story? How did you go from Abdullah to know Allah?
So basically, my life history is interesting, and my story is interesting in the sense that I was extremely religious. One of the key factors that helped me understand that Islam is fallible and the Quran is not the word of God is the exposure I gained from moving from Pakistan to Canada. One of the biggest issues in the Muslim world is taboo surrounding literally questioning the tiniest part of the Quran in any sense of the word. Most of the Muslims consider this to be the literal speech of God. that was passed down to Muhammad through the Archangel Gabriel.
Right.
And criticizing this in any Muslim country or Muslim majority country is almost equivalent to a death sentence. It's like a death wish if you do it. Me coming to Canada allowed me to view the Quran and talking to other skeptics from a different perspective. I was not viewing the Quran from the goggles of a believer with the goggles of devotion. Rather, I was viewing it from the angle of reason. So just to give a background that how religious I was, when I was in Pakistan, I was praying 5 times at the mosque. I wouldn't wear pants and shirts because I thought it was imitating the kuffar. I would not listen to it.
You went naked?
No, I was...
I know, I'm kidding. You didn't wear Western pants and shirts. Okay.
Exactly. If I would hear music, I'd shove my fingers in my ears. One incident that really comes to my mind was when I was in high school, I got elected as the head prefect or like a head boy of the school. And I was the head of the student council, and we had to have an oath-taking ceremony in front of 400 kids. And since I was the head of the student council, the principal called me over, and she was giving us a sash that says a title of your position, and you shake the principal's hand and you take a picture, and you raise your hand and you say an oath. Now, she was a female, and in Islam, it's not allowed to touch the hand of a female, because at that time, I remember Muhammad saying that if you touch a female that is not permissible for you to touch, it is like taking a nail and putting it through your head. So in front of 400 kids, I went up and she extended her hand and I said no. And I explained in the microphone why. And ironically, 2 of my teachers called me over and they praised me for my determination to follow the sunnah of the Prophet.
Yeah.
So this just gives you an insight of how religious I was. Eventually, when I came to Canada, I was part of the local MSA. I was really active. I gave the Friday sermons for about 2 years, pretty regularly. I even managed to convert one student at the university to Islam and one Christian woman in Pakistan to Islam as well. Over time, what happened was the more time I spent in Canada, the more exposure I got to different ideas. Because when I was living in Pakistan, I was living in a very monolith society.
Where were you? Which city were you in Pakistan?
I spent most of my time in the capital city, Islamabad, but I have lived in Lahore and Karachi as well.
And where did this incident with the school happen where you were because I know I was prefect too, and head boy I never wanted to be because it just sounded weird. Like, what does a head boy do? He goes around like, hey, head boy, come here, give me I don't know. But that's what they called it though.
Dad jokes.
But hey, I'm okay. I'll just shut up. No, but where
no, it's okay.
Where
You're
did
dad,
the incident
so allowed.
happen? Was that in Lahore or Islamabad or
Islamabad? Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, anyways, over time, the more time I spent around different type of people, I realized that we're all human, and these people aren't bad people. And eventually, I had to move away from the university, so I kind of disconnected from the MSA and I started working because I'd finished my studies. Once I started working, I was working with people from very diverse backgrounds, ranging from people from different like Hindus, Christians, and even atheists. And a couple of my best friends eventually ended up, I found out that they were atheists. Now, they started questioning religion in general, and then a few questions were raised specifically about Islam. And I wanted to answer those questions for them, but in my search for those answers, I ended up starting to doubt my own faith and eventually ended up leaving. So I got to Canada around 2013 December, and all the way up to around 2015 August, September, I was very active on campus and giving dawah and all that.
Tell people what dawah is. Dawah is like a call to Islam. right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. You're trying to convert people to your religion to save them from the hellfire.
Mm.
So around 2016, about, I'd say March, April, I started doubting Islam. But since I was so heavily indoctrinated, I'd still find an excuse. Over time, with more and more research, it took me about a year to finally get to the realization that this is not from God. And I still remember that moment where I had that epiphany, I remember I was watching this documentary called Amongst the Believers with my wife, and I was watching
that on Netflix, right?
Yeah. And it's banned in Pakistan. Anyway.
now we know why.
So there was a point where I noticed this guy, he comes into the school and he asks all the girls to put on their burqa or cover their face or hijab because men cannot see women. And it was at that point I realized that he's doing what Muhammad had envisioned, and what he's doing is nothing positive. And it was at that point I realized that this seems more like a cult than a religion. Even past that point, I still didn't go public about my apostasy because of many factors. Like I was still thinking, how it would affect my family, affect my relationship with my spouse, who was still a Muslim at that time.
Your family is religious, very religious, or as religious to you? So you were more religious than your family.
Yeah, definitely. One of the most religious kids in the whole family.
Sounds like you, Armin. Armin had a sort of similar thing. He was a lot more religious than his family.
My parents were like really, 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 really pissed off with me because I kept on trying to convert them to, to pray, to fast. My dad drank alcohol. They never went to a mosque. So I never actually understood how people could be religious and not take none of this seriously. Right.
Yeah. But anyway, go ahead. So your wife wasn't Muslim at that point, or she wasn't, she was still Muslim at that point.
Yeah. So I remember telling her that, and then she reacted in a very weird way where she said that, oh, we can't be together anymore if you're not Muslim. And I was like, whoa. Okay, so I calmed down I waited for about a month and I read a few books, and it was at that point I just couldn't keep it inside because it was my whole worldview shattering right in front of me, and I can't say anything to anybody or talk to anybody. And I also realized that what it had taken away from my life and the potential effects and the control religion can have on a person's mind. And since I've been through it, I feel like it is a duty upon me and a moral obligation to save the future generations and the youth from this. And that's why I started my activism. And yes, so regarding
how did you just to wrap up that story to some extent? What about your wife? Did she eventually come around?
Yeah.
Or
about 3 to 4 months later, like when I started posting online, she obviously was following what I was writing. And at first, she'd actually try to convince me that Islam is still the truth, and she'd show me videos of Dr. Zakir Naik and some other.
I don't know how is that convincing to anybody?
It's you know what? If you're from Pakistan and India, it's very fucking convincing, Armin. So calm down with your Persian, superiority complex.
So
actually, no, it's not. He's an idiot. But go ahead, Abdullah.
So eventually she started reading and she said, wait, these things actually in the book? Did the Prophet actually do this? I'm like, yeah, this is the most authentic sources. This is literally written in the Quran. And over time she realized that she'd been lied to and manipulated into this religion. And when she finally came to terms with it, she was the first more of like a deist but then eventually she's levitating more towards atheism, kind of more of an agnostic atheist now. But yeah, it was really tough the first month or two, because when I first loved the religion, I didn't identify as an atheist, because I told her I'm not a Muslim anymore. I don't know what I am. And then she started crying, saying that if you're an atheist and, you don't have any morals, therefore, our marriage is invalid and the whole 9 yards. But yeah, it took about 3-4 months and she calmed down. And then, yeah, now she's an ex-Muslim as well. And very supportive of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most important stories. The things is the personal stories. I think that when we hear these stories, they're all so different. And in terms of how people come to the epiphanies, it's fascinating. So let's get into the topic at hand.
So you converted your wife?
No, she was a Muslim about a year before she met me.
No, deconverted. You deconverted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, me, same here.
You deconvert. Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah. So,
I didn't do it on purpose. It's just she kept on asking me questions.
It was your wife. What was her religious background, Armin?
She was Catholic.
She was Catholic. Oh, yeah. Okay. She's Catholic. Yeah. So, so let's just get into this at hand. I think that when you talked about the epiphany, and you saw that this stuff wasn't the topic here is obviously we're going to be talking about the Quran, because you seem so well versed on it, and I've actually learned a lot from everything that you've written and you've posted about it as well. So, to what extent did that have a lot to do with it? Was that one of the primary, your primary impetus to leave, or was it a combination of other factors?
The whole story surrounding how the Quran came down to be, how it was revealed, how the relations took place, it was very awkward and weird when you think about it, because there's no evidence to support any of the claims. Then secondly, the stories in the Quran itself are at times so absurd and so against reason and logic that they just don't make sense. And then there's obviously scientific errors, and the Quran constantly reflects the mentality or exactly what you'd expect from a man living in the 7th century. And that's the most important part, is seeing it from the perspective of reason and not from the perspective of devotion as reading it to get good deeds.
Yeah, well, that's why you need faith, right? With all these religions, they require faith. Faith is the ultimate virtue, because if you didn't have faith, you would just look at it and be like, this stuff is ridiculous. You have to have, because faith by definition is believing something without evidence.
Yeah, definitely. So just to start, I'll give a brief summary of how the revelation started. So basically, Muhammad has started to hear stones and trees and rocks talk to him when he goes outside of the city of Mecca, and this goes on for a while. And he loves to meditate, and he goes outside the city into this empty cave, and he sits there with a few dates and water and meditates almost daily, and sometimes he goes on for long stretches. Eventually, one night he's meditating, and the angel Gabriel comes up to him. At that time, Muhammad did not know he was the angel, and he said this apparition came to him, and it says that he was either choked or strangled or hugged so hard, and then Muhammad says himself that he couldn't breathe. And then he was asked by the angel to recite these certain words in the name of thy Lord, and then Muhammad said, I cannot read, and then he did it 3 times. Eventually, Muhammad actually thought he was going to die, so he just repeated the words. Then he said he woke up and his neck muscles were twitching and he was sweating, and then he went outside the cave and he looked up in the sky, and there's an angel sitting on a chair covering the horizon with 600 wings. And Muhammad runs back to his wife and is scared, and asks his wife to cover him with a blanket, which is also referenced in the Quran in one surah that literally says, "Oh, you wrapped up in a blanket, get up and proclaim the message of the Lord." And Muhammad's own first reaction to getting the revelation was, he said, the words quoted in some of the biographies are, "Woe to me, am I a poet or possessed?" And
he thought it was a demon, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now there are also narrations.
He thought he'd been possessed by a jinn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he try to commit suicide? Didn't he?
Yeah, that's one of the.
So that's one of the interesting things. One of the earliest biographies of Muhammad, which is by Ibn Ishaq, said that he immediately afterwards he came out and he tried to kill himself. So he went up on top of a hill, but then he again saw the apparition, and the apparition said, you are the Lord, you're the messenger of God, and I am Gabriel. I'm paraphrasing Gabriel. Sorry, Gabriel, but the. So that incident when the Ibn Ishaq biography no longer survived. It only survived through certain oral traditions, and a few people had written down parts of it. But the Ibn Hisham biography, which is probably the earliest one in its complete form that survived, was an edited version of the Ibn Ishaq biography. But in the preface to that, Ibn Hisham wrote that I have left out some of the stuff that was sacrilegious or that may be upsetting to believers. And it turns out that the story of the satanic verses, the story of Muhammad's suicide attempt, which do appear in the Ibn Ishaq biography, are actually omitted from the edited version by Ibn Hisham. So that's already and we'll get into the biography of the Prophet in the next when we do part 2 of this, but already there is this element of a transgenerational over the years, transgenerational games of telephone, or Chinese whispers, as they used to call it before. Right. So I think that, he did try to kill himself, but so he went to Khadija, and then now he had the first revelation. Right. Yeah.
So eventually over time, what had happened was Muhammad would get revelation in phases where they'll come maybe like, once a month, once a week, and then there'll be gaps of about a year at times. And eventually what happened when Muhammad would receive the revelation, and he would be profusely sweating, he'd have jittery teeth, heavy breathing, headaches, hearing ringing sounds, seeing things, hearing things. And then he would recite the words in Arabic, and people around him would literally memorize it or write parts of it on pieces of bone or leather or leaves or anything they could find. Majority of the Quran was passed on via hearsay. Basically, I heard Muhammad recite the Quran in this way, and then on and on and on, and later on all the way to Uthman, which was about 30 years, no, it's about 15 years after Muhammad's death. So one of the very important things is there is no manuscript that survives.
Osman was the one that canonized it, just to be clear, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Compiled it, yeah.
Exactly. So what's staggering is when Muhammad dies, there is no formal Quran with people. And what ended up happening was, since it was only passed on through oral tradition, a lot of the people who had memorized the Quran started dying in battles. And it was at that point one of the leading companions, I think it was Omar, who eventually later became the second caliph of Islam, suggested to Abu Bakr, who was the first caliph at the time, to compile the Quran before it gets lost.
And Abu Bakr said no, because Muhammad never made a book out of it. So why should we make a book out of it if Muhammad didn't, right?
Exactly.
Which is true, because it's Sunnah. You're supposed to do what Muhammad did, right? So if Muhammad didn't turn it into a book, you shouldn't turn it into a book.
Yeah. So eventually, Abu Bakr realized the seriousness of the situation, because we find in many narrations that there were parts of the Quran which are no longer found in the modern Quran. And there were chapters upon chapters, like hundreds of verses. There's narrations that are absolutely authentic according to the leading scholars of Islam, like Ibn Kathir and stuff. They say that the 33rd chapter of the Quran, chapter of the Confederates, right now is only 73 verses long. But it used to be at the size of Surah Baqarah, which is about 286 verses. And there are hundreds of verses gone missing.
Entire surahs too, right? Entire surahs. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Now, just to give you an idea of how much there was discrepancy or disagreements between the companions of Muhammad themselves, so what part is considered to be of the Quran, is Muhammad said there's 4 leading companions you should learn the Quran from. One was Ubay bin Ka'b, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, I think it's Ali, and one more. So when you look at the narrations that have been passed on to us through them, you find that Ubay bin Ka'b had 2 extra surahs in his codex. Ibn Mas'ud didn't have Fatiha in his codex. And then they had severe disagreements on verses of the Quran itself. Like there are certain verses that you can still find in the manuscripts, but they're not found the same way in the current Quran. Mm-hmm. Why is this important? Because Muslims say that the Quran has been preserved absolutely perfectly, word to word, dot to dot. And this is the normal belief held by majority of Muslims.
And the Quran itself says that as well, that we will protect the Quran.
Exactly, in Surah 15. So eventually, when the book was compiled the first time, it was given to one of Muhammad's wife after his death, Hafsa, which was the daughter of Omar. And then later on, in the time of Uthman, is when they said, okay, we got to make a much more formal copy, because at that time, the differences between the companions had gone to such an extent that Uthman had to burn their Qurans. All the surviving codices, except his own version.
Okay, so don't blame me when I burn the Quran. Okay, because remember, a lot of these verses that the Uthman was burning, not all of them were wrong. A lot of them had similar ayahs and surahs to the Quran that we hold today, and he was burning the shit out of them. All right, so I'm just following the Osman's way, but I don't know. That's not Sunnah, anyways. But just to be clear with the audience, because I think it might get confusing, the timeline, right? So you had Muhammad died, then you had Abu Bakr as the first Khalifa, then you had Omar as the second Khalifa, and you had Osman as the third Khalifa. So during the time of Abu Bakr, and the fourth one is Ali, which is the first Imam of the Shias. During the first 2 Khalifas, there was no book called the Quran. It was just people, so now you're talking about Osman. This is the 3rd Khalifa, 2 Khalifas after the death of Muhammad, right? And when you say that they gave the book to one of Muhammad's wife, one thing people need to know is that a lot of these companions of Muhammad, because to be more united with him, they gave their daughters to him to marry, right? So Abu Bakr had a daughter, which Aisha was right with Muhammad. Omar had daughters that got married to Muhammad, right? And I think Osman also had daughters that got married to them. Did he? No, wait.
No, I don't think so.
No. Osman had wives that left him because he became Muslim. He was one of the first rich people that became Muslim. Anyways, go on.
Yeah. So eventually, about 15 to 20 years after Muhammad's death is when the first alleged compilation of the Quran into a formal codex was taking place. And even at this time, leading companions of Muhammad, who Muhammad said you go to learn the Quran from, like Abdullah bin Mas'ud, said about the companion that was compiling the Quran for Uthman, which was Zayd bin Sabit. Zayd bin Sabit was a guy appointed by the Caliph Uthman to compile the Quran. Abdullah bin Mas'ud said that do not take anything from what this man says as part of the Quran. For when I was listening to the Quran from the mouth of the Prophet, this man was in his mother's womb. So he wasn't even born. And so he just said, do not listen to this guy. And this is actually the guy who formally compiled the Quran for Uthman. Eventually, what it shows is that the burning of the Quran signifies that after Muhammad said there were major differences as to what is part of the Quran and what is not. One other thing I'll bring up is the concept of abrogation, because we're talking about missing verses. The concept of abrogation, it basically is that Allah reveals something, then He makes then he either substitutes or changes it for something better or different, or makes you forget something from before and replaces it with something new.
So this was all by design. The argument is like, if the verses went missing, is because God wanted them to go missing.
Yeah, this is the nasikh mansukh thing, right?
Exactly.
So this is, they cover everything. So you're like, hey, you say the Quran never changed. You're like, well, actually, there's verses missing. Well, because they were intended to missing. Well, they did. Then there is no way that the Quran has not changed, because any change that we point to, you're going to say that it was by intention.
Yeah,
God's intention. It just,
there are 3 levels to abrogation too, right? I think there are. But anyway, go ahead, finish what you were saying, and then.
Yeah, there's different types of abrogation. Some verses completely disappear from the Quran, and they're only found in the Hadith literature.
One of them was eaten by a goat, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are those that are where the ruling stays, but the verses disappeared, and that's like the stoning for adultery. Like the verses of Rajam, those are the ones that were eaten by a goat.
That was debatable, because Omar. Okay, so Omar wanted to stone people for adultery, and they're like, well, there is no verse because the goat ate the fucking verse that was supposed to stone people. And Omar is like, I don't give a shit. I remember that verse, so we're stoning people.
So the ruling still stays.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's the funny part. What's the wisdom behind God abrogating or canceling a verse out from his book, but still preserving its ruling through the Hadith? What's the wisdom behind that?
I just came up with something right now. See, this is why I would be a perfect Islamic apologist, right? Because God wanted I'm just coming up with this right now on the spot, okay? I think God wanted to show how strong the community of Muslims are. Right? To show that that his verses will survive, even his ruling will survive, even without them being written on paper. I just made that up right now. I don't know. Okay.
Well, hey, that's the tradition. That's tradition, making things up. But anyway, so go ahead.
It's sunnah to make shit up.
Right, then there are those verses which you keep them or delete them. They don't really make a difference because they're talking about spiritual or matters about the afterlife. Like there's a couple of narrations that mention verses that existed in the Quran in which a couple of tribes were being cursed by Muhammad because they killed a couple of his companions who were trying to steal their stuff. So the tribes killed his companion in self-defense, and Muhammad recited these verses for about 40 days. And then after 40 days, those verses just were told that they're no longer part of the Quran because Muhammad doesn't want them to be. And nobody understands what the point was, because the verses literally said that the people who were martyred in Muhammad's cause, Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah.
Mm-hmm.
And this verse does not exist in the modern Quran anymore, but it was part of what was revealed to Muhammad. And then there are those verses that don't apply in meaning or ruling, but were once revealed and then just taken out for no reason. A couple of examples that really come to mind is the breastfeeding verses. So in multiple hadith books, one of the most authentic ones, especially Sahih Muslim, there's a story which goes that there was a lady that had a man living in her house, a boy from a young age. Now, the boy had reached puberty, and the lady came to the Prophet saying that, hey, this kid now has desires for me, and he's not my blood relative. And what do I do about it? And then the Prophet's wisdom is amazing. He says, breastfeed him. And the lady's like, but he's a grown man. And then the Prophet laughs and he said, just breastfeed him. And then the lady actually goes breastfed him just so they can fulfill the condition of him being a relative to her, because in Islam, you're considered related to the person if you're breastfed by the person. So you can be around them without observing the hijab.
So the dude then didn't want her anymore?
Apparently, he says that after I breastfed him, all his desires for me went away.
Yeah, because it was gross.
I don't think that works universally.
No, because I think it works because you're grossed out by some.
Why'd you be grossed out? It's just sometimes
it's like she's acting like she's your. I don't know. I think it's fucking gross. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he was grossed out. Okay, not everybody is grossed out.
It's a light spring of
To me, it sounds in this story that he was grossed out by that experience. You guys are freaks. I don't want anything to do with you. Right? So
imagine if that Pornhub back then.
But,
anyway, the point is,
but the thing is that this was somebody based on this story tried to apply this in the modern world. There was this imam that said in where was this? Malaysia or Indonesia? Egypt?
I think it was Egypt. Al-Azhar said that you breastfeed your co-workers.
So basically, if a woman wants to work with other men in an office environment, the solution to that, the Islamic solution to that is for her to go breastfeed every single male co-worker. And after that, she could just work with everybody.
You can work together in the workplace.
And here's the funny part. Aisha actually implemented that too.
Aisha? What?
Yeah. So what started happening was when Aisha noticed Muhammad say this.
How are these women lactating on will? Like they were always having like this. You can't do this unless you're having a baby or something. Like what?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So if you're in an office environment and you can lactate, then you're shit out of luck, right?
But hold on, go ahead. So yeah, that's a good question. How did she do that?
Right. Yeah. So Aisha remembered the story when this lady came. Now, when men wanted to meet Aisha, Aisha would send them to her older sisters who were lactating and other wives of Muhammad.
Oh, shit.
That's pretty smart.
Is this authentic hadith? Is this Bukhari or Muslim?
It is authentic.
So it's that works. But I mean, hadith is.
So let's finish this because some people might not know what you just said. Okay, so can't finish it. So
at that time, Aisha was of a younger age. Like she wasn't really that mature. She's like 13, 14. And at that time, Muhammad's older wives thought that this is absolutely ridiculous. And then they said, "Oh, Aisha, we are pretty sure that was just the case for that one boy. You cannot apply it to everybody." It wasn't Muhammad who stopped it. It was Muhammad's wife.
This is after Muhammad's death, right?
Yeah.
So I think Aisha is 18 by this time.
Yeah, true, correct.
Yeah, okay. All right. So they're saying they're telling him Aisha. Maybe Aisha just had like she was like freaky or something, but like she was getting. But she was sending men to go drink milk off of her sisters. That's what she was doing.
And wives, so they can be her relative, and she doesn't have to do hijab with them, and she can meet them.
So she's like, so she was like treating her sisters like a cattle, like she was having
I think we get the gist of the story.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. I
don't want to dwell on it. I think that's great. It's worth an entire episode.
Okay,
but I just wanted to get back on because we got into this with the Nasakh Mansukh thing.
Yeah,
I'm just imagining like there's a farm with Aisha's sisters running around.
Just to let you guys know.
Wrap up. Yeah. So
in Saudi Arabia, by the way, there were letters like this all the time in Arab news. The newspaper there, people would write, "What if I swallow some drops of my wife's milk?" And then the guy would say, "Oh, you can't marry her anymore because your nikah is invalid. Your vows are invalid."
So this is a loophole because women have a really, really hard time getting divorced in Islam, right? But men can get divorced very easily by doing a triple talaq, right? Divorce. But women can't. All you have to do is just sneak in some of your milk in his drink, and now he's forced to divorce you.
There you go. That's
I just found the loophole.
Let Abdullah wrap up what he was saying.
All right, go on.
Okay. So basically, the hadiths say that there were verses that first said that 10 sucklings make marriage forbidden. Then it was reduced to 5 sucklings. Another verse came, and then both verses were gone. Just the last point on this. What Armin said actually literally happened in the time of Omar, and the story is hilarious, and it's documented in Imam Malik's Muwatta, which was one of the first hadith books, and considered one of the most authentic ones. So this guy goes home, and he wants to have intercourse with his slave girl. His wife comes up to him all nitty-gritty and says, "Guess what? You can't have intercourse with her because I gave her my breast milk, and now she's my daughter, so you can't do it with her." So the guy goes and complains to Omar, And Omar said, no, this practice has stopped. Now go beat your wife. You can still have intercourse with the slave and now go beat your wife because she did this.
Oh, fucking Omar. Omar was the most misogynist. Among all these motherfuckers, Omar was the worst one when it came to women, right? Omar was... He actually killed Fatima, not on purpose, but he was so...
That's according to the Shia version, but the Sunni version.
The true version.
The true version. So we got. I think that's kind of interesting. I think in the next thing we'll also get into this idea of how the hadith came about via isnads. They're called isnad, right? The transmitters, the authorities who transmitted it. So the hadith, they're even more hearsay, and they were actually.
But we're focusing on the Quran though, because a lot of people know that the hadith is hearsay. But they say, like, a lot of Quranists, a lot of Muslim Quranists, which is not a lot of them anyways. I think you can count them on your one hand. But Quranists say, like, oh, hadith is bullshit. Everybody made it up. It's, like, proven that it's made up. The Quran is the only thing we focus on. We're like, well, the Quran is the same. Right.
Well, that's a point I was going to make, is that the Quran was actually transmitted in a way that was not that much different from the hadith, because the people who memorized it, the isnad means, like, the authorities who preserve the oral tradition, they would commit things to memory and then they would reproduce them later, right? So the Quran was essentially transmitted the same way. And so recently it's been interesting, and just the last century and recently they have found
the live chat is saying my audio went low. Is it better now? Go on.
It sounds okay.
It's fine.
All right.
So a lot of this, the Qurans have been found recently, like old. So one of the ones was the Sana manuscript, right, which is known to be one of the oldest Qurans, and it's called a palimpsest. I don't know how to pronounce that word, or palimpsest, but which means that it was written and then it was erased and then it was written over again. So there is a higher text that is updated, and then there's a previous text that you can uncover, I think, with some sort of ultraviolet light technique, and you can see what was. And then it turns out that the lower text was that had some major differences with the modern Quran, whereas the higher text. So, do you know anything about that, the Sana manuscript?
Yeah, so basically what the scholars and two Muslim scholars analyzed this, one from Stanford and one from Harvard University, and they looked at the manuscript. What they do is they illuminate it with ultraviolet light, and the metals in the ink, they are visible, and you can view and you can extract the lower text. It's not always clearly visible due to the age of the palimpsest, but there are a lot that you can make out. One of the major things they found, I'll just give you a few examples of the differences, is verse 222 of Surah 2.
That's a menstruation verse, right? And menstruation's a disease. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole sentence structure is turned upside down in that verse. It's complete, like the tenses have been changed. You can clearly see that humans played around with it, and it matches more of what was found in the manuscript of Abdullah bin Mas'ud, one of the companions of Muhammad. The one, his manuscript, it matches with that one. Secondly, there are other variations where there's 4 or 5 verses, even whole phrases missing in Surah Ahzab. Then there are words missing in, I believe it's Surah 2, verse 196. The word for head, ru'usakum, was not present in the lower text, but was added later.
Under the feet, right? Yeah.
Just for the people that are saying you're like, this is all made up, no, the Quran never changed. There is authentic hadiths that people refer to missing verses. Like we have authentic, and by authentic we mean authentic as in his Islamic canon, because whatever their method is has this bullshit anyways. But according to Islam, there's authentic hadith that refers to missing verses, that there were verses here, that they're not anymore. So it's weird to me. How is it possible for Muslims to believe that the Quran doesn't change and believe in these authentic hadiths at the same time? Like, how's that possible? Right.
Yeah. So the reasoning they come up with is the lost verses are justified using the concept of abrogation and cancellation. Okay. But the variations in the text are justified using another hadith that basically says that the Quran was meant to be revealed in different ways by the angel Gabriel, and they say at least 7. And then these apparently are known as the revayas of the Quran, and they're a total of 7 major transmissions of the Quran, and they sub-branch into 2 each.
Who's saying these things, by the way, just to be clear, because people...
This is very well known by Muslim academics, even Muslim scholars. They studied the idea of missing verses, the different Qurans, the different the dialects or revayas of the Quran, as you may say. So just to give you a few facts, the Quran you study now only became popular in 1924 when it was canonized by Al-Azhar University.
You're talking about, okay, there's two, when we say canonization, the Quran that Osman canonized like 1400 years ago, that one, that's a different canonization, and that one didn't have the vowels and stuff. Like the original canonization is just the black text, not the dots, not the a, not the e, not the o, not the vowels. Those are disputed, and even Shias and Sunnis disagree on what the vowels are, which actually is very important because it completely changed the meaning of one verse, completely in favor of whether Shias are correct or Sunnis are correct. But this one that you're saying, Al-Azhar University, to be clear, this is a Sunni university, so whatever they come up with a canonization, whatever they decide, is not necessarily something that the Shias would agree with. But go on, sorry.
I'll try and share the screen and show what that script looks like, but keep going.
So just to refresh what we were talking about and get the timeline right. So Muhammad dies, there's no copy of the Quran. And then the first caliph makes a copy and gives it to Muhammad's wife. Okay. Then the third caliph sees that people are disputing the Quran a lot, what is and what isn't part of the Quran. So he burns all the Qurans that were there and makes one new copy.
Which Aisha met with Osman. Aisha, another wife of Muhammad, had a huge say in what some of the verses, like she made some final changes, didn't she? Yeah.
Yes, there were Zayd bin Sabit, Aisha, and a couple of other guys that made the changes. And then what ended up happening was after Osman canonized the Quran, that Quran was transmitted by people via oral transmission, and those were the 7 revayas, and they are 7 different people who heard the Quran, and then they passed it down orally via 2 students each. The most popular one is the Hafs from Asim, which became famous only in 1924 when Al-Azhar canonized that as the official Quran. Before that, and technically all the 7 versions of the Quran are equally authentic. Okay?
Yeah. But what Ali is showing above is the some verses of the Quran, and you can see these are the original.
And the old school style, the way they used to be without the dots and without the markings.
Yeah. Okay, you can stop that so that we can see the rest of us, because now we can't see any of us.
Oh, really?
Yes, stop the screen share. Oh, yeah, okay.
All right, there you go.
Back. And eventually, I remember, actually, there was a time that when they wanted to add the dots and add the vowels, they would do it in a different color. So because they said that it needs to be clear which part of the Quran is divine. Because if the dots and vowels were not part of the original Quran, so that can't be the divine part of the Quran. So they made sure that the black ink was only the divine part of the Quran, and everything else was in different colors added later. That was originally how they did it. But go on.
Yeah. So going on from there, you normally hear Muslims say that there's only one Quranic text. There's one Quran. You go to any part of the world, you pick up a Quran, it's always going to be exactly dot to dot the same. This is patently false. It is not. Before 1924, there were more versions that were more commonly used, but then 1924 came and Hafs became the most popular one. There are other versions like the Duri Quran, the Susi Quran, the Khalaf Quran, and so on and so forth. There's about 7 that are considered authentic. Some scholars say 10 are authentic, and some say all 14 are authentic. And the variations, it's generally the same, but the variations do encompass textual variants such as plurals changing into singulars, singulars into plurals,
So you're saying, are you saying the variations are beyond just the dots and vowels?
Yes, they are beyond just the dots.
So even on the divine part, which is supposed to be the word of God, even on that part, they can't agree with each other.
No.
In modern, wow, that's amazing.
I'll give you an example. Like in one version of the Quran, it says the Warsh Quran, it say qala, and the Hafs would say qul. Now, qala means said. And qul is a command from Allah to the Prophet to go say something.
Wait, is it qul huwa Allahu ahad Allahu samad? No.
Yeah.
No. Is that one? Yeah. Okay.
It just means say. So God saying.
So wait, are we talking about the first fucking verse?
No. We're just talking generally about an example of a variant in the Qurans found in the modern world right now.
Oh, okay. So this is. Can you say the verse? Which one is it? Because I want people.
I don't have it written down, but I can get it to you. I have a whole video on it. It's about 2 hours long, so I go into a lot.
Let's link to that video here. Okay. Let's link to the video in the description for people that don't believe us, because people are going to say we're making this shit up, right? But go on.
So, anyways, these variants vary from. So, who said what? In one Quran, it says that the person like Abraham said this to his people, and the other one says that no, Allah is commanding Ibrahim to say this to his people. So it's kind of a confusing spot. Like, did Allah command him to say it, or did Abraham say it and Allah is quoting Abraham what he said? Then there are other discrepancies where whole phrases are missing. Words are missing. Conjunctions
phrases are missing. In modern Qurans, we have different modern Qurans, but entire phrases are missing. Jeez.
Yeah, like in the Hafs Quran, it says فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ, and in the Warsh it says فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. So there's about 3 letters or one word. He is missing. The phrase Allah is missing in some places.
I don't think people understand. I don't think non-Muslims or people that were never Muslim understand how shocking this is, because growing up as a Muslim, we were told that trying to change a single dot in the Quran is one of the greatest sins that anybody could ever do. Like, this is like one of the greatest taboos. Like, the Quran is so perfect and is so unchanging that anybody attempting to do a little bit of a change, or like read it on purpose in a way that makes it different, write it in a way that that moves the dot or something, they're going to turn into like a insect or a stone or something on the spot.
How common are these other versions that you're talking about? Is there one that is really, really predominant that everybody uses, and then the others they're available, they're seen, but they're not very common? Because I know that there are, for example, the Dome of the Rock, the inscriptions, the Quranic inscriptions around the Dome of the Rock are actually significantly different in some ways than the written Quran, right? So there are. There's some instances that we do know about, but they tend to be fringe. They don't tend to be that common.
Yeah. So the Hafs Quran is the modern Quran, which most Muslims are aware of. The second most popular one is the Warsh Quran, which is normally used in Northern Africa. And then there's other versions like Khalaf, I believe, is used in Eastern, around Syria. So different regions use different versions. But they're still considered equally authentic. Now, the problem arises is
by who considers them?
By Muslims. Muslim scholars say that because Muhammad said the Quran was revealed in 7 ways, these are the 7 ways, therefore they all have to be authentic.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but so there's a consensus of that view among scholars?
In Sunni scholars, the consensus is that yes, there are different dialects and variants of the Quran, definitely. The only problem is how many are authentic. Some say all 14 that were transmitted were authentic. Some say out of those 14, 10 are authentic. And some say only 7 are authentic.
Right.
And I also have a Quran which has the text of the Hafs Quran in the middle, but in the margin it lists every variant. And I kid you not, there's more than 5,000 variants in that book. And it records which reciter said which verse in which way and everything.
You know, this knowledge should make a ex-Muslim out of every Muslim that I know. This what you're saying right now.
No, but apparently it's not that. Apparently it's very well known among at least scholars, but it's
just
not.
Just the scholars. Like, this would shock average layman Muslims. This would
the reason why they don't tell this to the normal Muslim, and the scholars study it in great detail. All of this is brought to us by Muslim scholars. The reason they don't tell is because it shatters the miraculous claim of the Quran.
Right.
Because then it becomes just like a book you would expect to be transmitted by humans.
Yeah.
With subtle differences here, subtle differences there. There's nothing miraculous.
It's very human. It's very human. It looks like you become skeptical. Like, it seemed like just people were just making shit up and disagreeing with it. It seems very political. And actually it's very interesting because with the hadith, when the hadith coming out, and you can see the political reasoning behind why some hadiths would be written the way they were at different times. Like, people say Muhammad said this, Muhammad said that. There's a political reasoning behind a lot of them. So I think that with the Quran, it might seem like it's the same thing. Like, think about this. A lot of Muslims, not a lot of them, but many Muslims that figured out how the hadith works, decided, okay, I'm just going to focus on the Quran, right? So now they're going to hear the same thing about the Quran. There's no escape, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the Muslims seem to reject the hadith because they say the hadith are so much more absurd and they contain so much nonsense. Plus, God didn't take the responsibility to protect it, right? Yeah. But they fail to realize that the Quran is where the absurdity begins. The Quran is extremely absurd as well. And that trickles down into the hadith literature.
Yeah.
And just to give you an example of a few things, like the Quran says in Surah 11, verse 7, that God's throne was floating above water before the creation of the universe.
That's just a metaphor.
How does...
It's a metaphor.
And then,
yeah, it's a matter of, we just have to figure out maybe it's a recipe for.
It's talking about the primordial soup and stuff.
Yeah.
Or the earth was created first and then the stars were created.
Yes, that's my favorite. The Genesis says that as well. That's the most obvious error. Like the biggest one, because like you can't be more wrong about the nature of the universe than that.
Now, the one thing I really love this point is when the Quran describes shooting stars, which are actually meteors, as flames chasing Satan, because Satan or jinns went up to the heavens and were eavesdropping on a conversation of angels, and then angels suddenly realized, oh shit, there's Satan listening to us. Let's throw a star at him.
Okay, that's
actually.
Do you know the funny thing is, like the first time I heard the term eavesdropping, eavesdropping, I always thought it was the first woman ever in Genesis, kind of going to the bathroom.
Anyway, is that the Quran or Hadith?
It's in the Quran. It's in Surah Safa, that's Surah 37. It's in Surah Jinn and Surah Mulk, that's Surah 67.
I don't remember that. But
so listen. Sorry, Armin.
Can we mention the goat eating part, because that's very important, because a lot of women have been saved because of that goat, right?
yeah, that's the adultery stoning verses that were eaten by the goat. You already covered that.
Yeah, but the thing is, I want people to understand that the argument for stoning would be a lot stronger if that verse made it into the Quran, right? The thing is that right now, I think the main agreement is that it's lashing, right? Not stoning, right? Because that they got that from the Jewish part, which was also, but the Jews were stoning. So I think the stoning was copied from the Jews. I don't remember how.
Well, a lot of stuff was copied from the Jews.
Yeah,
but I had to. So Abdullah, because we're running out of time here, and I want to be respectful of that. I'm probably going to keep you maybe about 5 minutes over. I know, but so I had to.
Then we're going to do a second episode, right? Don't go anywhere, people in the live chat, because we're going to do 2 episodes back to back for the people in the live chat. But it's going to be cut into 2 pieces. One is the Quran. The second one is going to be focused on Muhammad. Go on. Sorry.
All right. So this is something I mentioned before and was kind of interesting. It's so from Wilfred Madelung. He's a German scholar of Islam, and he's a little bit sympathetic to the whole Shia version. So he goes with the whole idea that he says that Muhammad never really named a successor, right? So he never said that. That's why there was so much controversy after he died, and the Saqifa meeting and everything like that. So there was when they were trying to come up with a successor, and there was a schism between Shia and Sunni and so on. So then what he says is afterwards, Fatima, and this is something that everybody accepts, that Fatima was kind of put under house arrest. There was an issue. She had an issue with Omar, who was the second caliph at the time. And she died 6 months after Muhammad died.
Because they robbed the caliphate from her husband, you motherfuckers.
Yeah. But here's what his proposal, what he says is that according to the Quran, Fatima was his only surviving daughter. So she would be getting 7/8 of his inheritance and his property and everything that he had. This did not sit well with Omar, who, as Armin pointed out, was misogynist. He thought it was a shitty thing. So they were fighting over the thing. She was under house arrest. The dispute kept going on. Eventually, she died. The Shias think that he killed her. But anyway, whatever it was, she died. And she apparently had a miscarriage along the way as well. And she was very young when she died. And after she died, they kind of took over. All the men took over. So in a way, there's this idea that Islam, whatever it was, died during that time. And then it's very possible if you have a scenario like this, a revisionist scenario like this, right? And everything's revisionist because we don't have any authentic idea of what really happened. Then is it possible that, once Muhammad's dead, Fatima's dead, the Quran hasn't been compiled yet, you basically have these isnads who are carrying around these things in their head. Now you have 3 caliphs who all of whom are statesmen that have political interest. Was the Quran written by one man? Was it by Muhammad, or did everybody kind of add to it before it?
No, there's definitely additions to it. And one incident that comes to mind is a man named Abdullah ibn Shar. He was one of the first converts to Islam, and he even migrated from Mecca to Medina, and he was one of Muhammad's earliest scribes. Now, he is quoted saying in Ibn Ishaq's biography and a couple other places that he suggested an addition or a supplement word to the verses of the Quran as Muhammad told him. And then Muhammad says, oh yeah, actually your version sounds better, write that one down.
And that guy was like, what the fuck, right?
And at that point, he said that I don't trust Muhammad. And he left the religion and went back to Mecca. And then Muhammad wanted him dead. And eventually he was pardoned because Usman was his brother. But yeah, no.
That's what Trump did to his ghostwriters, by the way. His ghostwriters essentially wrote his own book. He's like,
he realized this is all bullshit. If Muhammad is taking tips from me on writing the Quran, this can't be the word of God. But here's an excuse. I'll just come up with an excuse right now. God was basically speaking through him. There you go. You can just make stuff up as you go. But
Armin's going to come up with a new religion by the end of this episode.
But another thing I want to point out before we go to the next episode is that Aisha learned a lot from Muhammad because she noticed, I think she figured this shit out, right? She noticed that Muhammad is just coming up with ayahs verses every time he needs something. She in fact said something at some point because when the verse came down that Aisha did not cheat on Muhammad and did not commit adultery, and God came and said that she's innocent, the verse that said that you need 4 witnesses and stuff like that, she actually said, like, I can't believe that this verse just came down for me, right? Like she actually said that. And the interesting thing is that when Muhammad died, she kind of played the same game that Muhammad did with verses. She played the same game with hadith, because Aisha is the source of a lot of hadith. And a lot of them are contradictory too, just right. But she would just basically come up and say, "Oh, I remember Muhammad said this." The same way that Muhammad would say, "Oh, God just told me this, so you fuckers better listen to me." Aisha would say, "I remember Muhammad said this, so you fuckers better listen to me." So, and that's how she became the source of. I think she's the second. She produced. There's only one guy that beats her in the number of hadiths that she's produced, right? Yeah, I think.
Yeah, Abu Huraira.
Abu Huraira was the number one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem with hearsay, right? Like, you're just depending on people, and you got to trust them, what they say. That if somebody says, I heard it from the messenger of God, you basically trust them. But going on, I just want to quickly wrap up a few things I find really absurd in the Quran.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, we went through the shooting stars claim. The whole idea of two nudists eating from a tree they weren't supposed to eat from, and that was how humanity's story began. And the funny part to note in this story is there's a big blunder. It's so inconsistent, because before that incident happened of the snake and the Garden of Eden, Allah had already kicked out and banned Satan from heaven for not bowing down to Adam. And then it was after the fact, when Eve was created and they were in heaven, how did Satan get in back to heaven when he was already banned?
I have an excuse for this. He possessed the snake, and that's how he's sickening it. So he wasn't he wasn't physically there. He couldn't get in because he was kicked out. So he possessed the snake, and that's how he managed to get. Yeah.
But how do we know the snake wasn't getting revelations from Gabriel? So,
okay. Oh yeah, that's the whole satanic verses. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Or the Quran says in Surah 29, verse 14, that Noah lived to be the age of 950 years old.
Right.
And the funny part is,
back then. That's what they say.
Even though he was 950, he failed miserably in his mission. For 950 years, you're giving dawah, and only a few handful of people accept your mission.
Jesus, can you imagine the arthritis?
Yeah.
Well, that's why he failed his mission. He should have started at age 300 or something, not 900.
Gosh, that retirement plan, man. But
and then,
yeah, go ahead. No,
yeah, I'll finish a few things. So, this one story, one of my favorite ones. So, at the time of Moses, a man mysteriously dies and nobody knew who killed him. So, they come up with this ingenious idea to figure out who killed him. So, God commands people of Moses to find a yellow cow, slaughter the yellow cow, and then throw a piece of steak from that yellow cow onto the dead body. And the dead body then got up, named its killer, and died again.
Right.
You can just see the look on Ali's face, and
but isn't that
I've heard that.
Copied from,
I can never get enough of this. We once had one of like last year when we first started this podcast. I think one of the earlier episodes was called "Silly Scripture," where I mean there were four of us at that time with Faisal and Yaz, and we came up with, we collected all of that most insane stuff that we found in Scripture, and we talked about it. So it was a lot of fun.
Just to explain this, we have this in Shakespeare as well, where somebody like dies and all of a sudden the ghost comes and points to the killer. But like people have this story is a favorite part of like ghost stories. The difference is this is not a ghost, it's a zombie, because it's the body that is standing up. And to turn a dead body into a zombie, you're throwing a stake at it, right? But you're not throwing any stake at it. You're throwing a stake from a yellow cow at it. And so stakes from yellow cows turns dead people into zombies that point to their killers. That's what the message is.
Cool.
Or have you heard about the zombie birds in the Quran?
Yeah. What were they called?
Wait, are we talking about the birds that throw stone at the elephants?
So that's the ababil. No, not that. Not
that one. So what happened was Abraham wanted to see God give life to the dead. So he's like, God, show me. So Allah says, take 4 birds and chop them up into pieces, mix up their pieces, and then put the mixed bunch of pieces on 4 different mountains.
Oh, yeah.
This is in the Skeptics Annotated Quran. If you guys want to check it out, Google Skeptics Annotated Quran. It's absolutely hilarious. It describes it. There's a Skeptics Annotated Bible as well.
Wait,
and all of that stuff.
This is a story. This is not something that happened during Muhammad's life. This is a story that Muhammad said had happened to somebody. Wait, wasn't this Abraham that did this, or another prophet?
Yeah,
Abraham did that. So Muhammad couldn't do. A lot of people say they don't know any of the story of Muhammad is real or not. The stories like this makes me think that some of it is real, because Muhammad didn't produce shit miracles. There's one that he did like cut the moon in half, but most of the time people are like, well, show us miracles. And he was like, I'm not going to show you miracles because look at that town that just next to us that is ruined. You know what happened to them? They had a prophet. They asked for miracles. Their prophet gave them miracles. Nobody believed them. And that's what happened to them. And God just ruined their city. So I'm not showing you miracles for your own good, because if you don't believe me after I give you miracles, you guys are so fucked, right? So that was his excuse for not giving miracles. And to me, this seems like this story is some of this is probably true, because if it was just all made up, he would just be just giving, instead of telling people like, hey, Abraham had a bird that put all on this mountain and that mountain, and they all came together and became a living bird. The story would be that Muhammad did that himself, right? He wouldn't be telling stories of other prophets. But go on. Yeah. So that's his
So I also made a video on it with Abdullah Samir. It's called Stories in the Quran. It's on Abdullah Samir's channel. It's about 14 minutes long, and I tried my best to go through all the stories I could find in the Quran. And it's an exclusive Quran video. But anyways, just to sum it up, because it's getting late. At the end, I'd say that imagine how big the universe is, how intricate it is, and how detailed it is. And then imagine if there's a God that existed, he would come up with a book that would be jaw-dropping, that would mesmerize us and catch our imagination and blow us away, blow us out of the water, because he's the
not make us laugh like this. Not make
exactly
right.
But when you look at a book like the Quran, it is so fallacious. It's an insult to a God if one exists.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote you on that. If the Quran is an insult to God, if a God exists, that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. No, it's true. I've always thought that. I was like, why is this, this supposed creator of the universe that came up with time dilation, tectonic plate shifts, and binary pulsars? Why does he care who you're having sex with, or whether you care rivers of wine, mountains of fun? It's insane.
By the way, Shahruz, just before we go, Shahruz from the live chat is saying Armin asked about the verse from the Quran that's Gabriel's own words, not Allah's. I think those are hadiths. Isn't that the Gabriel hadith?
Actually, it's a verse about Surah Kaf.
What the hell?
If you know the story, basically the 18th chapter of the Quran, the revelation story behind it was that this people asked Muhammad 3 questions, and they wanted to know if he's the right prophet. If he's a true prophet, he'd know the answer to them. And one question was about the 7 sleepers. The other was about the
cave sleepers. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then the third one was about the soul. And Muhammad said, "Oh, I'll come give you the answer tomorrow. Just wait." But 2 weeks passed, and Muhammad didn't come up with an answer, and people started humiliating him. And it was at that point, 2 weeks later, when Muhammad came up with the surah and everything, is apparently where Gabriel shows up and tells Muhammad why the surah wasn't given to him earlier, because he didn't say a few words that were inshallah by God's will. Now, the phrase that Gabriel says that appears in the hadith, the exact words of Gabriel ended up being in the Quran. And if you want to look into it in more detail... So
there are verses in the Quran that are not God's words, but they're Gabriel's words? Isn't that the
one verse?
Yeah, it's just a partial part of a verse,
Wait,
I believe.
Doesn't that make the whole point of the Quran being Allah's words?
Still Allah's word. Gabriel.
No, Gabriel. No, it's Gabriel. Gabriel is supposed to not say anything himself, just give you God's words. But apparently there's a small portion of it that is not God's word. It's just Gabriel's words. That makes...
Yeah, there is a part where it's just Gabriel's words.
What the hell, man? This whole... the whole...
If you want to look into this more detail, the Masked Air made a series about this, and it's super clear to me. The 18th chapter of the Quran is by far the best chapter you can look at to see why Muhammad was not...
What makes the Quran? Because I thought...
Sorry, you said the 18th chapter is the one to look at that shows that Muhammad was not a prophet.
Yeah, the history behind its revelation, the content of that chapter, it's beyond absurd. The Master ended up making about 3-4 videos on it, and this is the same chapter that mentions the Gog and Magog and everything. And
I don't get it because Gabriel himself has a whole hadith dedicated to him, right? Which is like hadith not by any human but by an angel, archangel, whatever. But the hadith from Gabriel is where we get the 5 pillars of Islam, right? So, but the reason why it's hadith and not the Quran is because it's Gabriel's words and not Allah's words. But if Gabriel's words are in the Quran, then what makes a Quranic verse a Quranic verse? Like, isn't the whole point of the definition of a Quranic verse is the fact that it's from Allah's word? Like the whole, like, I don't understand. There's no consistency in the definitions anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the point of that being there is, as the Master pointed out as well, that it shows that it's not, like Muhammad is not consistent within himself.
And John is asking, could Muhammad tell the difference between Gabriel and a jinn pretending to be Gabriel? We didn't talk about the satanic verses because this brings
exactly.
And
let's do that. We'll do that in the next one in his biography as well.
Because we can't.
What we can do is, if you want, the next episode, I've been researching this topic for a while, it's a very sensitive topic, but it's what was Muhammad's condition during the revelations when he received them? What was he experiencing? What can we decipher from a neuroscience perspective of
temporal lobe epilepsy?
I don't know. I don't know if you guys can do that. I don't think it's fair though.
No, the amount of evidence I have found, I have absolutely no doubt he was suffering.
But we don't know how.
I wouldn't say absolutely no doubt. I would say likely. It's the most tenable note.
Okay, but we don't know how much of the stories are true though.
Yeah.
Based on the assumption that you accept what's found in the hadith.
Okay, so let's say we don't know Muhammad had this conversation. The character of Muhammad, whether it's fictional, okay.
Yeah, we'll get into that next time. I just had one last question for you on the Quran, and that's because there's a lot of people.
So many last questions. No,
this is really the last. This is the final revelation, the final question. It's the last prophet. The Birmingham Quran was just discovered by, I think, just a couple of years ago, and it was carbon dated to. That's what I was actually showing the screenshots of when I shared the screen. It was actually carbon dated to around between 585 and 645 AD. So 585 AD would mean that it predated Muhammad. Now, later on, I mean, most serious people say that, okay, it did not predate Muhammad. It's more likely that it was towards a later bit of the time range. But it was actually a written version of it. So do you know anything about that? Do you have any thoughts on it? Or
the thing was, Birmingham Quran hasn't been studied thoroughly by scholars, and there aren't a lot of papers on it. And just to give you an idea, the Sana Quran was found in the 1970s.
1972.
And I think it was 2009 when Benghazi wrote that paper from Stanford that actually caused ripples amongst the scholars when he highlighted what was found in lower text. So from what I know, there are certain discrepancies in the Birmingham Quran as well, but people mostly say that it was past Muhammad's time because the vowels that are found in some parts, or they might have been added later on. Because I remember reading something about the inks being dated differently. Like the dots, like Armin said, they put the dots in a different colored ink compared to the written text in the form of the letters. So, but yeah, I've read that there's a 27 missing letters in the Birmingham Quran parchments they found so far, but I haven't looked into more detail. I've looked more into the Sana Quran and the Samarkand Quran, and they have quite drastic variants.
Yeah, that's right.
You should write a book or something.
In the future, there's so much to write about. I just want to.
Where can people find you?
They can go to my Facebook. Go by the name of Abdullah Gondal. They can also watch my YouTube videos. I normally make videos with Abdullah Samir on his channel, and I do appear with Armin and Ali here. And I've appeared with Armin before on the Atheist Republic channel as well. And we talked into more detail about the Quran's preservation then.
Yeah,
we should have Abdullah Samir here as well at some point.
No, we will. I've already. I absolutely want to have him on. I think he's fantastic, and he's got a great story too.
You guys are a great team, by the way. You two are a great team.
Yeah, you guys are fantastic.
You too.
So I really thank you for your time today. I know that you were pretty generous with it, and I'm looking forward to
live chat. People, don't go away. We're just taking a small break. We're going to be back. How long of a break?
Oh, no. Abdullah has to go. He's going to be coming back. We're going to reschedule again because he has to, you have to get up very early.
Oh, okay.
Very early. He has to be up for Fajr.
Okay, so we're going to schedule or something. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to do that. So we're going to have him back, and then we're going to do a part 2 of this where we are going to talk about Muhammad. And I'm very interested in that because I have some views where I think that I might disagree with you guys on. That'll be kind of interesting. So
I have disagreements with you guys on. And Muhammad as well. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to let you go so you can get some sleep.
Right.
Until next time.
This is so fun, by the way. I don't know if our audience like these episodes, but I think they will love it. But for me personally, these are my favorite kind of discussions.
Yeah, I like the fact that we can we do have to have some of these things where we get a little bit granular because I think the whole idea of Quranic criticism, really, this is the way to the way to break the taboo is to normalize criticism of the Quran and to normalize debunking infallibility, getting rid of this idea of infallibility.
And these things, we do have a lot of listeners in Islamic countries, and I think this is very important. I'm hoping a lot of them go check these things out after listening to this because I think this is going to be very crucial for them to. I mean, a lot of this is the most powerful. The information that you're giving is a very powerful way of getting a lot of Muslims skeptical. Like that's what I told you last time. Like I can't. Like this is information that is out there. Like you don't have to go to any non-Islamic sources to show them this. Right? You go to Hadith, you go to Quran, and this is all there. The fact that their verse is missing, it's in the Hadith, and this is such a powerful way to get so many Muslims start doubting their Quran. Yeah.
Okay, Abdullah, we're going to give you the last word. So, but just want to let everybody know we have a lot of fun here. I know that we had that whole tangent on breastfeeding and everything.
That was the best part. What the hell?
That was, of course, that's always the best part. But anyway, just for people who want to see like really long, sort of extensive Abdullah get into these, check out the Abdullah Gondal, Abdullah Samir videos on Abdullah Samir's YouTube channel. He's got like something like 15,000 subscribers. I mean, he's doing really well. So make sure you check that out if you want more detail on some of these stories. But Abdullah, go ahead. Last words?
Before we end this, I just want to say to the listeners that the Quran is definitely not infallible. There are so many ways you can criticize this book. And just to give you an idea that just the part of textual criticism, just a variation in the Quran, ended up taking about 2.5 hours of my time to discuss it with Abdullah Samir. And we go into an insane amount of depth. And whichever angle you look at it, the Quran is a book that's full of absurd ideas, from sticks turning to stones, to a man splitting the moon in half, to morality that's so bad that you chop people's hands off and you crucify them, and then you're lashing people. And there's verses saying that if women commit adultery, you should lock them in their houses for your whole lives. Muhammad can marry his adopted son's wife, and he's using. And then there's sex slavery and slavery that's normal, and it's never mentioned in a bad light. But here's the funny part: God could ban. It would actually turn people into apes and pigs because they ate shrimp on a certain day, but he didn't have the time to ban slavery. And at the end, the Quran is a book that appears to be of patently human origins, and is honestly really insulting to attribute to a God. A God can do much, much, much better.
Well, it first has to exist to be able to do any of it. But do you do somebody Kirill in the live chat is asking, do you do debates at all?
I would love to. I mean, everybody I want to debate, they either end up canceling at last moment.
I've been doing this for 10 years, and people do not want to debate. They will write an article, and then they'll say, "Oh, here's my debate with Ali Rizvi." I'm like, that wasn't a debate. You just wrote a fucking article, and you quoted me on one line.
The problem with you, Abdullah, is that you're too scary to debate. Like anybody that even, like any Muslim that even just takes a tiny bit of a look at what you're doing, they will immediately see that you're way above their league to be able to even, they would look so stupid, right? That's why I think you're having a hard time finding anybody to debate you.
Yeah, I guess that's one aspect of it. But I mean, there are definitely good Muslim apologists out there that could have very interesting conversations with me.
Well, get them. Let's challenge.
Yeah, I've been trying. Like, if you find
a lot of the Ahmadi Muslims do. I think there's a lot of Ahmadi Muslim activists that would do it. But again, the problem is, like, when you do those debates, the majority of the audience is like, well, he's an Ahmadi. We don't even count. He doesn't count. So that's also another problem.
It doesn't matter, even if they're an atheist, as long as they could present a good argument, it should be taken. The thing is that I'm not saying nobody will accept you. I'm just saying it's a challenge to find somebody, because I know some people were wanting to debate you, but then they realize it's too difficult to debate you. I'm not saying you're not going to find anybody that is willing to debate you. I'm just saying that's one of the reasons why it's probably difficult to find anybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, that was a lot of last words. Do you have anything else before we go?
I guess that's about it. I'm getting tired.
Okay.
Gotta get up for Fajr.
We squeezed the shit out of this guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Abdullah.
But I mean, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really looking forward to the next one. And what we can maybe do is do these power episodes where we dig into a certain aspect of Islam in more detail.
Can we go to after Muhammad, the Khalifas and some even the Umayyad? No, you don't like that, Ali? No.
I was saying I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm down with all of that.
Do that. Definitely, because that's interesting. Because
I want to talk about the Umayyad, the Abbasid transition. I think that's
the Ottoman. Yeah. I think
all the assassins
infighting where the Kaaba was destroyed.
So much drama. I think people that think it's boring, they don't know how much family drama was happened after Muhammad's death.
Yeah. Just the last I want to make is there's a chapter in the Quran, Surah Fil, at the end, where when the Kaaba was a house of idols, Allah sends birds and they drop stones on this army of elephants and they all die and the Kaaba is saved. Now you would expect that when Muhammad dies, the Kaaba is the center of, or the most holy site in Islam.
Yes.
I'll still protect it against the invaders, but it gets destroyed twice.
Right.
That's why you should wear condoms.
That's a year of the elephant, right?
Protection is.
That's the same. But that's the same year Muhammad was born, right?
Yeah.
And if that happened, I think the whole world, that city, would be way more famous than it is. You know what I mean? I don't think people see a whole army of elephants came to destroy the Kaaba. A whole bunch of birds went and picked up stones and killed a whole bunch of elephants. And now nobody talked about it for a whole bunch of years. I was like, oh, okay, that happened.
Interestingly, that by the way, that story also appears in the Hindu scriptures, which is fascinating because they were.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah. It's not only that. Brahma, the highest spiritual god of the Hindu religion. The word Abraham is actually derived from Brahma. So Brahman, the Brahman caste. Okay. So and then Brahma was associated with Saraswati, Abraham, Sarah in the Old Testament. The Old Testament, the guy Abraham's father was from a city called Ur, right, which is sort of at that area. Anyway, that's a whole.
But one more thing: how could small little stones kill people? I never get that, because these birds were either like giant ass birds. Or people told me rocks from very far up, they would become a speed of the bullets and stuff.
Gallbladder stones and kidney stones.
I don't know. All right. Anyways, but that's
Abdullah. Thank you. Go to sleep.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel.
It was awesome.
The live chat people are saying, Mars is saying that was fantastic. Abdullah, Mike is saying, yeah, that was great. Some people are shocked that the Kaaba was ever destroyed. Mars is saying that. So thank you, people in the live chat. Mars, Shahru, John, everybody,
Bogey, Carol, everybody.
Bogey, you guys are awesome. Anyways,
we'll see you guys for part 2. Abdullah, thank you, man.
All right.
Thanks.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.